There have been some people who just remain really bothered by this. In fact, I've seen articles, I've seen videos about just how horrible it was. Hey there, it's Dallas, and I wanted to address a couple of things here because as the show has grown in popularity, there's also some things that sometimes cause people to question or doubt moments from the show. Now, I'm not talking about the people who hate the show because it doesn't stick to scripture, or the people who hate that not all of us are evangelicals who work on the show, or those are covered in other videos. Those people aren't going to watch the show anyway. I'm talking about people who have sometimes sincere issues with the show, where actually they like the show, and we're watching the first 4 episodes, or 5 episodes, or 6 episodes, and really liked it, and were really passionate about it, and trusting in it, and then something that they saw all of a sudden bothered them, and now they question whether or not the whole show is something that they can trust. And sometimes people come to us and say, look, my friend won't watch the show because they heard that XYZ took place, and what do I tell them? What I do want, though, is for you to occasionally have an answer for when people have a question about a particular scene, and I just want you to be able to have those tools in case you're wondering what my thought process was, or what the thought process of my co-writers and I, or our Bible consultants and I, what we were thinking when we did this. So in this video, I'm going to give you the top 5 moments in the first 2 seasons that caused the most heartburn or questions, sincere or otherwise, on social media or on the Chosen fan club page, where people who actually liked the show were bothered by this. And so then I'll talk through these moments and give you at least what my thought process was, so that even if you disagree with me, you at least know where we're coming from. So I'll do these in chronological order, so these are not in order of importance. The first one is in episode 5 of season 1. There is a moment near the end where Jesus is dancing with the disciples.
So you help him? Some things even I cannot do.
Simon Peter has told Jesus that Andrew isn't a good dancer and wonders if Jesus can help him. And then they start dancing and they see Andrew dancing, and Simon asks him if he can help, and Jesus says, some things even I cannot do. There have been some people who actually have done YouTube videos about this or written blogs about how blasphemous this was, because of course Jesus can do anything. Some even will say, well, I know it's a joke, but that's really horrible to say. This is a criticism that I don't actually usually take too seriously, but I'll at least give you the thought process just so you can respond to people who say that. Obviously, Jesus is joking. And here's the funny thing about humor. It wouldn't be a joke and it wouldn't be funny if Jesus wasn't deity, if he didn't know everything and could do everything and wasn't actually aware of that. Of course he's aware that he's deity. Of course he's aware that he's God. And of course he can do anything. And if he wanted to, he could make Andrew a better dancer. The humor comes from the fact that that is true, that that is an established fact. So him joking about the fact that he can't help Andrew's dancing is a joke at Andrew's expense, and is not a joke about the fact that Jesus can't do something. Again, very clearly, we believe that Jesus can do anything. That's why the joke is funny for most people, is because it's a joke about an established fact. So in episode 7, there is a moment that there's a lot of people who really love the show who were genuinely confused by this moment. And I actually understand why. This is after Jesus and Nicodemus have had their long conversation. And Nicodemus, at one point, kneels down before Jesus, and here's what happens.
You don't have to do that. What are you doing?
Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way.
Blessed are all who take refuge in him.
So the thing that bothered some people quite a bit, is Jesus says, you don't need to do that. What are you doing? You don't need to do that. Some would say, well, why would Jesus ever refuse worship, especially if he's God? So it's a fair question. And of course, God doesn't reject worship, and in fact, in many cases, loves it. And there are other moments in the Gospels even where Jesus rebukes people who are complaining about a woman who was worshiping Jesus by pouring expensive perfumes on his feet. So why would we do that in this scene? Well, it wasn't just haphazard, and it's certainly not because we believe Jesus shouldn't be worshiped. It's because Nicodemus himself had been treating Jesus like an earthly king. He was seeing Jesus as a Messiah who was going to bring about an earthly kingdom, conquer the Roman occupation. And throughout the scene, scene, we've established that Nicodemus is confused, and they're talking about the fact that it's matters of the heart that really matter and not the Roman occupation. And so Nicodemus, as a Pharisee, one of his struggles is materialism. It's something that he struggled with in his marriage. And so we believe, and we wanted to portray this throughout the show, that Jesus tends to call people where they're at. He usually calls them or asks them to follow him or speaks to them in a way that's reflective of what they're actually going through. So Nicodemus, in this moment we were portraying, was not necessarily worshiping Jesus as God. He was worshiping as an earthly king, wanting to kiss his hand. And he says in response, "Kiss the Son lest he be angry." Nicodemus is doing this in a way of like, I need to bow, I need to be respectful of you because you're an earthly king, and if I don't, you might be angry. And Jesus responds by saying, yes, but blessed are those who take refuge in him. So for Nicodemus specifically, that wasn't what he wanted from him. He was after Nicodemus's heart, and he wanted the right kind of worship, not a worship out of kingly duty. Then, of course, the most popular thing to criticize about the show is episode 5 of season 2. It was chock full. It was a veritable cornucopia of controversial moments. There was, of course, the sermon prep and the Mary Magdalene relapse, which I'll get to in just a second. I won't spend a whole lot of time on that because we've discussed it in so many other places. But there's the whole John the Baptist and Jesus conversation that for some people was really bothersome. They were wondering, why would Jesus and John the Baptist argue? Why would John the Baptist speak to Jesus disrespectfully? And why would Jesus speak in terms of warning John about some of the things he was saying to Herod? It sounded like Jesus was maybe downplaying some sin. There's also, as part of this episode and part of previous episodes as well, Simon Peter would refer to John the Baptist as Creepy John.
I was standing next to John the Baptizer.
What? Creepy John.
There have been some people who just remain really bothered by this. In fact, I've seen articles, I've seen videos about just how horrible it was that the chosen would disrespect John the Baptist so much. So let me make something very clear, because this is a really important point. A character in a show who does something disrespectful or anything that is wrong or sinful or questionable does not mean that the show itself is endorsing that behavior. We got a criticism in episode 3 of season 1, for example, when the children didn't tell their parents about meeting with Jesus, and then they just thought that was wrong. Well, I wouldn't necessarily disagree that it wasn't great that the kids didn't tell their parents. It wasn't a huge deal, I don't think. I mean, I think it's part of the story, but it's not like the show was endorsing the behavior, we're portraying the behavior. Just because we portray Judas as betraying Jesus doesn't mean that we think, oh, the show now believes it's okay to betray Jesus. Just like someone calling John the Baptist Creepy John, we're not saying, well, we believe John is creepy. So anytime you see anybody say, I can't believe they would call him Creepy John, Jesus said he was the greatest. Well, of course we agree. We don't say that John is creepy, but it's obvious that there were some people who thought that he was, considering his very unique and bizarre lifestyle. He did have a bizarre lifestyle. He lived out in the wilderness, and he ate crazy things, and he wore crazy things. Now, Jesus, of course, said, and we will portray this in an upcoming season, said that John is the greatest. We believe that John the Baptist was amazing. And Simon Peter even comes to believe that John the Baptist is amazing. But it is absolutely plausible that Simon Peter, who wasn't one of John's disciples, and who in a moment of anger...
Pardon me if I'm not exactly jumping out of my sandals because Creepy John pointed at someone.
So that's a moment of anger. Simon is very upset. He's really frustrated, and he's not taking John the Baptist too seriously, just like a lot of people probably didn't take John the Baptist too seriously, even faithful Jews. There were probably times when they didn't necessarily receive everything that he said. And so Simon Peter also at one point doesn't pay attention to Jesus. Like when Andrew's trying to tell him about Jesus, Simon is like, I don't need a lamb, I need fish.
No, the word from you about this lamb of yours. We don't need a lamb, we need fish.
So no, we don't believe John the Baptist is Creepy John. Yes, we believe it's funny. Yes, we believe it's within Simon Peter's character to say something like that. Yes, we believe it makes sense to introduce the character in that way to show that there was controversy about who John was. Now, when it comes to this conversation between Jesus and John the Baptist, just recognize our Bible experts and Messianic Jewish rabbi and an evangelical scholar and a Catholic priest, all three of them were universal in that, yeah, this conversation made sense. John the Baptist was an intense guy. He was an argumentative guy. At one point, he even argued with Jesus, saying, do not baptize me, I should baptize you. And Jesus said, no, you need to do this. There were lots of things on which John the Baptist was a fiery type of person, and it would have made sense for him to argue with his cousin. In fact, Jewish people still today, one of the things they talk about themselves and admit themselves is like one of the ways we debate, one of the ways that we just learn is actually through debate and through argument. That scene actually rang really, really true for the overwhelming majority of Jewish scholars and Jewish people that I know, who all love that scene because they're like, yeah, this is two guys working out some of their questions. John the Baptist questioning Jesus to us was very plausible, not only only because of the way he was and his personality, but because we saw moments in Scripture where he was questioning Jesus, including when he actually sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you actually the Messiah, or should I look for another, because he was stuck in prison? Now, some people may believe that that was just John educating his disciples and he was just throwing out a pejorative question to make a point. But Jesus doesn't say that he was. Jesus actually recognizes that John was asking a question, was doubting, and yet still John is the greatest. We do believe John the Baptist was awesome. We do believe that he was the new Elijah. We do believe that he was the great prophet who set the way for Jesus. But not everyone did. And John, yes, also sometimes had questions for Jesus, and we thought this was a very plausible and realistic conversation. Now, as to whether or not Jesus was questioning John's decisions, I think that's plausible as well. Jesus wasn't a political figure. I don't think it's implausible that Jesus would have said to John, are you sure about what you're doing with Herod? And are you thinking through? Now, Jesus didn't rebuke what he was doing. He didn't stop him from doing it. But do we know for certain that Jesus would have agreed with or endorsed John's behavior with some of these kings? Probably would have endorsed it, probably. But we don't know for certain. And it's certainly worthwhile and fair for Jesus to have asked John some of these questions to make sure that John is thinking through things properly. That was the perspective of that scene. Then, of course, we've got the sermon prep moment and the Mary Magdalene relapse. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. We did a video that we'll link to in the description where I did a whole response to episode 5, and I got more deep into it. And we also covered it in depth in our Bible roundtables for episode 5 that you can watch. They'll be on the special edition DVD. We've also put this clip out online as well, where we discuss this whole topic. I'm not going to defend it much here. I'm just going to say that there has been considerable debate for 2,000 years among scholars who are smarter than me, smarter than you, both sides of whom disagree, even though they're both passionately believing that the Bible is the Word of God and that Jesus was both God and both man. I believe Jesus was fully God. I believe Jesus was fully man. Absolutely, I believe Jesus was the Son of God. I believe he was sinless. I do not believe that his 10 seconds of sermon prep in that moment represent a denial of his deity. I probably disagree with many people, obviously, about the topic of whether or not Jesus would have prepped for his sermon, but just know that if you think it was blasphemous, there are many, many people who love the Bible just as much as you do, who've studied the Bible just as much or more as you have, who disagree with that. Does that make us right? No, it does not. Do I know for certain that Jesus would have prepped his sermon? I absolutely do not. I just think that it's silly to think that someone knows for certain that he wouldn't have. Again, if you want more on that, you can check out these other videos. I'm not going to get into that here. Finally, we've got the Jesus as rock star moment in episode 8 of season 2. Some people very uncomfortable with the fact that we were portraying Jesus like a rock star because there was a stage and he came out through a curtain and there were lots of people and they were handing out flyers and this was like an evangelical crusade or something like that. And when in fact in the Bible, when Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, he was on a hillside and people just started coming to him and he started out by talking to his disciples. Yet that is true. It is true that in the Bible, for the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded by Matthew, Jesus was on a hillside. Now, many scholars believe that this was more likely a collection of multiple things Jesus said at multiple times and Matthew collected them into one thing. Debatable. It could have absolutely been as Matthew seemed to describe it, which is that Jesus just started talking and sharing some truth bombs and just kept going for several chapters and people just started to gather. That is certainly possible. It's also possible that Jesus did this more than once. In fact, I think it's almost certain that the things that Jesus said on that hillside in that scene that he delivered on more than one occasion. And so for us, it felt natural to say, we're going to show the growth of his ministry and show how many people are starting to show up. And so let's combine some of the stories from the Gospels, moments where Jesus preached in front of thousands of people. Let's take that Sermon on the Mount and put that into this context. Now, what does a stage mean? I don't believe that a stage means that Jesus was a rock star or that meant he was a celebrity. In our minds, it was a hastily assembled stage, an opportunity for Nathaniel, who was an architect, to contribute to the group and do something for the express purpose of enhancing the visual and audio ability of the sermon so that people could see him better, that people could hear him better. By no means are we talking about sparks and fireworks and whatnot to do it. It was just like the invention of the microphone. It was not done to make someone more narcissistic. It was just done to enhance the audio. That's just how simple this was. We just thought this is a really good way to show the growth of the ministry, to show how many people are being impacted by it, to show how the disciples are working together, because it is actually true that disciples back in that time would have prepared the way for Jesus, would have gone ahead of him, tilled the soil, as it were, gotten people to pay attention, gotten people to show up for some of Jesus's teachings. And so we thought this was a good opportunity to show that. We just happened to make it so that the Sermon on the Mount, the content that we see from the book of Matthew, was what we were going to put at this time. It doesn't make Jesus narcissistic. It doesn't make that we believe he's a rock rock star. It was just literally here's a visual way to show the growth of his ministry, how it's growing faster than the disciples even expected, and how they can participate in the spreading of the word. And the stage was nothing more than, and the curtain was nothing more than an opportunity for Jesus to step up and actually be heard and seen better while he delivers this important message. If you actually watch season 3 coming up, you'll see that Jesus actually does mingle among the people. So he doesn't stay on the stage for long. Interpret that as you will. I can assure you we weren't trying to make any kind of statement about 21st century evangelical concerts or anything like that. It was just an honest attempt to show where the progress of the ministry was going. That is the 5 things that have gotten the most questions. I hope that gives you at least some perspective, some background on what we were thinking. If you still disagree, that's totally fine. We, of course, never hope that a single disagreement or even a few disagreements cause you to want to dismiss the entire show or to question our entire salvation, our entire perspective, or all of our motives. But if that happens, there's nothing we can do about that. But hopefully this gives you some answers if people do have questions. So thanks so much for checking it out.